Okay. Well, I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'll get started. Good morning again, and welcome to the Equity Workforce and Climate Critical Training Equipment and Infrastructure Grant RFP pre-application webinar. We do have space built into the presentation for questions. Please wait until those times to come off mute to ask your questions. However, feel free to put questions into the chat.
Acetaminophen that I
Please put any questions that you might have as in the chat as the presentation progresses, and one of our staff admins will answer the question there or call it out in Q&A time. If your question does not get answered during the webinar, please join us for scheduled office hours, and those times can be viewed on our website. Until time for Q&A, please self-mute your microphone to reduce possible disturbances. And know that this meeting is recorded, so if you would not like to be visible in the recording, please turn off your cameras. If you'd like to connect with anyone else on this call, please add your name, organization, and emails to the chat. And these slides and the recording will be posted on our website after the presentation. Thank you very much. We have a packed agenda today, so we're going to get started. Next slide, please. Welcome everyone again. My name is Jenna Wills. I'm a senior program manager on the adult training and MWBE team. I am joined today by several Mass CEC workforce development team members. We will not be doing individual introductions, but Mass CEC folks, please add your name, title, and email into the chat. Our team, on behalf of our team, we do look forward to meeting many of you throughout the RFP process. Next slide, please. Today's agenda includes a brief overview of the Equity Workforce and Climate Critical Training Equipment and Infrastructure Grant Funding, a section on eligibility, the application process, and timeline, and time for Q&A. During the Q&A, you may unmute and ask questions. Please know that due to a long presentation and limited time together, we might only be able to take 2 questions per Q&A session. And just a reminder that we do have many office hours scheduled between now and early spring. So if you have program-specific questions or questions that do not get answered today, we do encourage you to attend office hours. After our first Q&A session, we'll review the application and process timeline and have time for more questions. And finally, we'll review more information about the funding, office hours, and networking activities. At the end of the presentation today, there'll be one final space for question. Next slide, please. This RFP is an outcome. These RFPs are an outcome of the Workforce Equity Fund, which was established in 2021 by the Massachusetts legislature, setting aside $12 million annually to support the clean energy sector, ensuring an equitable and inclusive industry in Mass. Mass CEC does this through supporting minority and women-owned business enterprises, also known as MWBEs, doing business within the clean energy sector, expanding hiring as they grow. In conjunction, we work to increase job pipelines and clean energy occupation. Also, just to note that the new 3-year Mass SAFE plan includes $24 million per year. Next slide, please. The fiscal year 2025 state budget sets aside $20 million to be transferred into the Clean Energy Investment Fund. $9 million in this funding is drawing from the fund, and Mass CEC's organizational budget was allocated to be expended for the clean energy workforce development initiatives directed by the Massachusetts Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2025. Next slide, please. Occupations critical to the Commonwealth achieving 2030 emissions goals and net zero emissions in 2050 include net zero grid sector occupations, high performance building sector occupations, offshore wind sector occupations, and clean transportation sector occupations. Applicants are encouraged to consult the Mass CEC Clean Energy Needs Assessment and the companion data workbook, both available at masscec.com. Also, you can review this information on page 7 of the RFP. We're supporting specific populations with these RFPs. You can follow the QR code to get more information. The first target population is individuals that live in environmental justice neighborhoods. These individuals are disproportionately negatively impacted by climate change. The bullets outline what is legislated as meeting the criteria for an EJ neighborhood. And as mentioned, the QR code shows an interactive map, so you can dial into specific neighborhoods around the Commonwealth. Also included in the target population are members of underrepresented communities in the clean energy workforce, current or former workers from the fossil fuel industry, and members of federally recognized or state acknowledged tribes. Next slide, please. And finally, this slide showcases examples of priority occupations within the climate critical sector. You may also review the RFPs for more detailed examples. Some listed here include electricians and solar installers, customer service reps, HVAC technicians, and EV technicians. And next, I'm going to pass it over to Edward to share more about the specific RFPs we'll be talking about today.
Thanks, Jenna. So as Jenna just went over, we have blend and braid several different funding sources, and we actually have more coming down the line. At the moment, those funding opportunities are being dispersed via 4 RFPs that we have. And this chart in front of you represents those 4 different RFP opportunities. On the top right, we have planning capacity grants. So after listening today, if you find or you think that you're not quite ready for a full-on implementation grant, I would advise you to check out that RFP, which would give you funds to plan up for an implementation application, and also potentially run a pilot if you need to run a pilot to test out your model first. Later on this season, we will be releasing as well a minority women business enterprise support grant opportunity, which is represented on the bottom right of the chart. For those of you who work with small businesses as well as training individuals, so keep your eyes out for that. The 2 RFP opportunities that we're talking about today, though, are represented in the orange box on the left. So we have an equity workforce training RFP, which is that focused on the target populations, up to 1.2 million, and an award for up to 3 years. We'll go into more details about each of these. The climate critical on the left in the green is up to 800,000 for up to 2 years. And there are some differences between the 2 that we'll go through throughout the course of this webinar. Please look at the QR codes to get to the actual web pages for each of those opportunities. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, there's a slight difference between the 2 RFPs that we'll be talking about today. In addition to the amounts, the biggest takeaway that you should take away from today in terms of the differences is the target populations eligible for each RFP. So on the left in the blue, the equity training RFP is focused on the target populations that Jenna called out on a prior slide, whereas the climate critical RFP is eligible for any Massachusetts resident. We do recognize that many training programs recruit from both populations. So we do encourage you, if you find that your actual historical recruiting catchment area covers both, and you do not believe that you could do 100% equity, there is the opportunity to apply for both funds and to blend and braid the funds together. In addition to that, the 2 different RFPs have slightly different focus strands that we'll go into in more detail, but the quick takeaway is that under climate critical, we do have a dedicated strand for incumbent workers. Under equity, you can still train incumbent workers under strand A, the career pathway training. It's just not a called out strand dedicated to that. But also under equity, we do have space for career exploration and career awareness. Next slide, please. So in addition to the RFPs we're talking about today, we will be releasing student and young adult focused RFPs in the near future. This chart here is based on how you should decide which sort of focused RFPs you should apply to, the student young adult or the adult training RFPs. So on the top in the green, that's the youth focus. So if you're training in everyone under 18, definitely that's a student and young adult RFP. If you are training anyone who's over 24, you should definitely be focused on the 2 RFPs that are available now and that we're talking about today. If you are in kind of that murky area of the young adult range, the 18 to 24 range, it really comes down to the off ramps that you're focused on for your training. If you're building up career readiness, if you're having career pathway plans and technical skill development that would effectively result in some sort of placement at the tail end, whether that's an apprenticeship, a direct placement, some other sort of outcome like that, then it would be highly advised that you consider the 2 RFPs that we're talking about today. And there is a more detailed version of this chart on the RFP pages, and on both it's attachment 6. So next slide, please. I'm handing it off.
Thanks, Edward. So now we are going to talk about eligibility and talk about who is eligible to apply. So Mass CC defines the lead applicant as having a Massachusetts-based office or staffing, and they must be able to submit a certificate of good standing from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. The list here, you'll see an extensive list of some eligible entities to serve as lead applicant, and this includes community-based entities, for-profit entities, and other workforce development organizations. So please refer to the RFP for more information regarding eligibility, and we will talk now about partnerships in the next slide as well. So partnerships are looked upon favorably as they can deliver a range of expertise for your programs. And while one party should take the role of the lead applicant, in this slide, we wanted to further explicate on partnership and show that it is agnostic on who can be the lead, as all entities are eligible to lead. We encourage you to pick partnerships that are best for you and your program, and those who you think would provide good support services. There are overlapping skills that organizations share to help applicants with their program proposal. For example, a school may look to other employer partners besides just career centers for placement, such as workforce nonprofits or other workforce employer partners. Next slide, please. So now we are going to take 2 questions about what we just went over. Feel free to just unmute and ask.
Are you guys going to provide copies of these slides after?
Yes, so these slides will be posted on our website as will the recording. Mara?
Tamara, go ahead.
So there are,
I'm so sorry. I hit the wrong button and I didn't even realize I'd raised my hand. I'm so sorry about that.
No
That's
worries.
okay. Did you have a specific question?
I didn't. No, I was
Oh,
trying
okay.
to do something. I'm just technologically inept today. I apologize.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
there are 2 questions in the chat. There is one question about whether the transportation sector is a part of the current focus, and the short answer is yes, as long as it's a clean energy transportation, EV focus. I also could include infrastructure, and there's 2 more questions, and we'll save the last one for later if we have time. There was one question about whether training could be entirely individual paced, not instructor led, and fully virtual. The short answer is yes. However, that depends on whether that is appropriate for the target populations, and whether that actually results in a good result where the participants could actually be hired and employed. In many cases, we find that many of the occupations we train for, hands-on experience is key to them being employable. So I'll pass it back to the team to continue. And we'll ask Karitza if you hold your question for the later Q&A.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now we are going to walk you through the actual application process. Please. Okay, so this is a broad overview of the application process, but the first step is to read the RFP and all of the attachments thoroughly to understand the goals of the RFP solicitation. The second step is to interact with all of our RFP resources, such as attending a webinar or attending office hours, which we will also get into in a later slide. We also encourage those with questions to reach out to rfpworkforce@masscc.com at any time. And the last step to officially apply is to submit all forms and attachments adhering to their instructions and requirements by May 2nd, 2025. Next slide, please. And I will pass it off to Kira.
All right, thank you. So this slide details an extensive application packet with all the materials that are found on each RFP's website. So each attachment will have individual instructions for how to fill out that specific form. When you're actually going to submit your application, you're only required to submit attachments 1, 2, and 3. And additionally, 2 letters of support or MOUs from employer partners are required to be submitted as well. Next slide, please. So here's a brief timeline of the application process for both equity training, climate critical RFPs. So obviously today is our pre-application webinar. We have pre-application office hours that are ongoing that will go into more detail and throughout this presentation. The first deadline for applications to be submitted is January 24th, and the final date for submission is May 2nd. Interviews of applicants will be as needed, and then applicants will be notified in spring/summer of 2025. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're gonna run through some of the selection criteria and items that we consider when reviewing equity training and climate critical applications. And as always, please refer to the RFPs for more detailed information. So the first criterion is the applicant and partner experience. So we're looking, does the applicant have a track record of working with the target population? Is there more information on a track record of workforce development success? And is there a defined network of partnerships? The next criteria is target occupations and populations. So we're looking to see if an applicant targets the correct target population and occupations in alignment with the climate critical sectors listed in the RFP, as well as to see if the proposal understands potential barriers of the target population, and if there's multiple career pathways for advancement. The next one is outcome budget and leverage resources. So does the proposed program have strong outcomes and a way to measure and track those outcomes? Does the actual budget itself reflect a reasonable participant cost? And is there an identification of funding to continue this program post Mass CEC grant money? Program delivery, we'll get into this criteria a little bit further in detail more in the presentation, but just briefly, we're looking to see that the application has a reasonable duration, dosage, as well as a clear case management plan. So next slide, please. The next set of criteria is around job placement and employer engagement. So does the applicant have a strong level of employer engagement throughout the project, as well as are there clear job placement pathways for participants within this program? The wraparound and social support services, we're looking to see if the applicant has a case management plan that understands the barriers of the participants, as well as provides support. Retention services post-placement criteria refers to applicants having a clear retention plan for at least 6 months post-placement, and will continue to monitor and track these participants for 12 months after placement. And lastly, diversity of approaches criteria. We recognize that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach or a single way to run a program. So we're looking for unique, strong approaches that fill many industry needs and gaps in the workforce training space. So next slide, please. And I will pass back to, I believe, Edward.
Thanks, Kira. So Kira went quickly over some of the scoring criteria, and one of the last ones was diversity of approaches. Just to kind of drill down into that a little bit, during scoring, we take into account various features that, for example, if we know there's a training desert for a certain occupation in a certain region, that might result in a higher score for an application. In addition to that, as she mentioned, there's innovative and novel approaches. There's not a one-size-fit-all for training. So this example that you're seeing here is like sort of it represents several layers. One is the fact that there's not necessarily one career pathway for a given sector. You can come in, for example, in customer service and then get technical training and end up as an auditor. Or the other example that this is representing is that we have some groups that are doing ecosystem support. And for example, they're not doing direct training per se. They are in fact instead doing career navigation through portals and coaching. And so that's a different approach to training than you would think of normally when you say workforce development. So we're open to different ideas as long as it fits the needs of the ecosystem. And if you're unsure if your program design fits the RFP, we highly advise you to come to open office hours because we have the space during open office hours to discuss a little bit more freely concepts. Just be aware that they are drop in, drop out office hours, meaning that anything said in the open office hours are subject to public knowledge. Next slide, please. So we do have some standards though about the traditional training pipelines. So there are best practices out there. Workforce development is not a new thing. It's especially in Massachusetts, we're fortunate to have a great ecosystem with many organizations doing great workforce development approaches. What this chart represents is that during our scoring, but also just generally in terms of the best practice approach, we're looking for some very clear outreach and recruitment plans. Intake and assessment plan is very important because we find that a lot of programs may not invest as much time as needed in intake and assessment, and then they bring on individuals who are not truly interested in completing the program. So we have some thoughts about having a stronger intake and assessment process. Obviously there's the technical training, which is important to be matched to the needs of the employer so that there is employability at the tail end of the training. And then the placement plan has to be more concerted than simply directing people towards jobs listings. And as Kira mentioned, retention is pretty big for us. We see a lot of the occupations actually, the training is pretty short, but keeping someone in that occupation is difficult because there's many difficult barriers in the occupation, both for just the job itself, but as well as the populations we're dealing with. The two arrows above and below though represent that we also believe that it's a best practice to make sure that wraparound support services are happening throughout the process and even post-placement. And a lot of the success that we see in the best programs is when an employer is actually engaged throughout the process, that they're in there helping define the curriculum, they're in there providing some mock interview practice, and they're touching base with the participants from day one so that there's some familiarity and understanding from both ends so that everyone can meet each other where they're at. So that's what we view as sort of the best practice, generally speaking, about a workforce pipeline. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned on a prior slide, we have open office hours. We strongly suggest that you come to them if you are considering applying. There will be a QR code on the next slide that we'll put up with the dates, and that's the best way to check into the dates and decide when you can sign in. They are drop in and drop out, so you don't have to feel like you have to stay for the full hour if you're tight in time. The other thing is we mentioned partnerships are key. We recognize that a lot of these programs are very comprehensive and difficult to do. And so you need a lot of support. You need a lot of support, both in terms of staff, but also in terms of options for off-ramping people and options for providing additional supports that maybe your organization cannot provide. So we strongly advise you to talk to other groups and find partners to come in with. Next slide, please. So again, here are the office hours. We'll pause here for a second. These are the dates coming up. We recognize that many groups applying may not have time during the day, especially if they're in the trades themselves. And then now I'll pass it back to the team for the additional information.
Okay, so now we're going to take a deeper look at the application strands in each of the RFPs, starting with the Equity Workforce Training RFP. Go to the next slide. You can see here that for both strands in A and strand B, the program duration can be 1 through 3 years. Also visualized here is that a required additional monitoring phase should be included in your proposal. We'll go deeper into the strand program elements on the next group of slides, but for example, if there was a proposed 2-year training program, including 2 years of planning, recruitment, training, job placement or advancement, and post-placement programming, i.e. retention, including coaching, support services, the proposal should also include monitoring after that 2-year period ends to track participant outcomes. So participant outcomes, for example, retention in the job 6 months later, salary change, advancement, and you'll want to reflect that monitoring in your proposal, including in the application for proposed duration of the grant and in the proposed budget as well. Next slide. So here are some program highlights for Strand A, a comprehensive training program leading to employment in climate critical occupations. As you've already heard, the Equity Workforce Training RFP aims to provide underrepresented population with skills, certifications, and support needed for placement in clean energy careers. And wraparound supports such as childcare, transportation, language assistance, as well as case management and direct financial supports. Edward already explained in detail a few slides back. The barriers have been addressing these barriers have been shown to increase both the training completion and job retention and advancement. And successful proposals will address barriers for the targeted population in their application. We also want to note that Strand A program elements can include both the comprehensive technical training as well as the career readiness and preparedness for success. So if you go on to the next slide, you can see here that if you're so again, if you're applying for a Strand A application, you would not also submit a Strand B application for the same training program. Rather, career preparedness navigation should be incorporated into the Strand A proposal. If you were submitting two applications, they would be for very distinct programs. A successful Strand B application for career awareness, exploration, navigation, and preparedness will lead into off-ramps into next steps. So next steps including trainings or hands-on experience, for example, pre-apprenticeships, apprenticeships, internships. Note here that the award range is different for Strand B compared to Strand A, but both would still include wraparound supports and support services, as well as the additional outcome tracking and monitoring for the participants. And now I will pass it off to Christina to discuss program elements for these strands in more detail.
Thanks, Heather. So when it comes to the Strand A career pathway training, we are looking to see that the training design and delivery is comprehensive, and that the training model embraces innovative and proven strategies to increase participant success. So the program design should include case management and support services tailored to meet participant needs and promote completion, retention, and advancement. When it comes to wraparound and post-placement support, we're also looking to see that participants would have comprehensive access to wraparound and support services and retention services, including career counseling and/or mentoring for at least 6 months post-training, although best practice would be a year post-training. And we're looking to see that retention plans include various approaches to support continued participant career advancement in high-quality jobs. Next slide, please. Thank you. For Strand B, under the Clean Energy Career Awareness, Exploration, Navigation, and Preparedness, we're looking to see that the program design and delivery features a clear and thoughtful range of exposures and career pathway options, including clear access to next steps for participants or off-ramps. So off-ramps could be things like a pathway into a training, an internship, or direct employment. We're also looking to see that there's comprehensive access to wraparound services, in this case, including support services and retention services, such as career counseling, mentoring for at least 6 months post-training, although again, best practice would be a year post-training. And Strand B applicants will be reviewed on the level of support relative to the type of off-ramp that the program involves. When it comes to outcomes and post-training activities under Strand A, successful applications will include milestones that indicate successful completion for individual participants. So here are some bullets and examples of what those milestones could be. And we're looking to see that there's a description of plans to engage relevant partners to provide off-ramps to participants. So when it comes to employer partners, we want to see comprehensive placement strategies that include dedicated job development staff through either the lead applicant or partners with letters of support and MOUs. And we're requesting 2 letters of support or MOUs with the application. Under strand B, outcomes and post-exploration activities, successful applications will include, again, milestones that indicate the successful completion for individual participants. These might look a little different under strand B as opposed to strand A, as well as descriptions of plans to engage partners around the setting up of off-ramps for participants. So under strand B, those could include either employers or training providers. And again, here we're looking for letters of support or MOUs from at least 2 partners that offer those off-ramps. Now I'm going to pass it over to Ben.
Thank you, Christina. Ben Christensen. I'll be talking now about the climate critical workforce training equipment and infrastructure strands. So here's the strand roadmap for climate critical. So these are up to 2-year awards. Both strand A and B, similar to on the equity side, will have an additional year of monitoring. So when developing your budgets and program timeline, please be aware that after the 2 years of program delivery, that there would be an additional year of light touch monitoring and reporting and participant tracking. Next slide, please. So we'll go dig a little deeper into each of the strands for this solicitation. So strand A mirrors strand A on the equity side, a little bit different with the award ranges and the award duration, but the goals of the strand are similar in that we're looking for a comprehensive training plan, include wraparound support services and high touch case management to meet participant needs, and that there is that placement support into clean energy careers with at least 6 months, ideally up to a year of retention support. Again, the main difference between strand A for climate critical and strand A for equity training is that strand A for climate critical has more latitude in participants, as you can enroll any Massachusetts resident. You don't have the priority population requirement, but priority populations are encouraged to be enrolled in both programs. Next slide, please. So strand B under climate critical is focused on upskilling for incumbent workers. So the goal of this strand is to provide more opportunity for folks already in the workforce to gain skills to increase their work in clean energy. So these are, again, 1 to 2 year awards with up to 600,000, with the goals being to create new or expand career advancement programming and upskilling to help workers gain the valuable skills. And again, to also provide that post-placement support and wraparound services to ensure that as folks are gaining these clean energy skills and continuing on their career path, that there's opportunities for advancement and retention. Next slide, please. And the third strand under climate critical is the equipment infrastructure and training ecosystem support strand. So these can award range from 50,000 to 750,000 with a max 2 year award. The goal of this strand is to assist in securing modern equipment and infrastructure resources for climate critical workforce training program. The strand will assist in the purchase and installation of specialized equipment required. This strand also leaves room for infrastructure that may be digital or curriculum based that could be utilized by the ecosystem as a whole once completed. So we do have room there. So it's not hard equipment that's required, but if you have ability to create either a career mapping tool or a curriculum that the entire ecosystem could have access to, that could be considered under the strand as well. Next slide, please. And I will now pass it to Anitra.
Thanks, Ben. So for this section, I'm going to be talking about additional selection criteria for the climate critical RFP. I'm starting with strand A, program design, training delivery, outreach, support services and placement, and retention. So for strand A, we're going to be looking for comprehensive training plans with strong vocational and workforce readiness curricula designed to meet employer needs. We're also going to be looking at training delivery models that embrace innovative and proven strategies that increase participant success. In addition to that, the program design should include case management and support services tailored to meet participant needs and promote completion, retention, and advancement. And then finally, one of the additional selection criteria for Strand A will be, we will be looking for programs who provide pathways to industry recognized credentials or licenses and or articulated higher educational credits. More information in regards to these additional selection criteria for Strand A can be found on page 20 of the Climate Critical RFP. Next slide. So for Strand B, we're going to be looking at this additional selection criteria for program design, career advancement, and upskilling. So we're going to be looking how applicants present a detailed training plan with clear benefits to incumbent workers and participating employers. In addition to that, whenever relevant, the training program should offer industry recognized certifications, credentials, and the program design should benefit participant skill development without proposing any cost to the individual worker. And finally, we'll be looking at whether or not the proposal includes a clear and eminent opportunity for those workers who participate in the training program to utilize these skills by getting advancement either in their current job or finding new jobs that will employ those skills. Additional information in regards to this additional selection criteria can be found on page 21 of the Climate Critical. Next slide. So finally, for Strand C, the additional criteria in regards to program impact and training, we're going to be looking at whether or not the equipment or infrastructure will increase the availability of quality of climate critical occupational trainings. We're also going to be considering whether or not the equipment and infrastructure will increase the number of students able to participate in existing programs, or whether or not new programs will be able to be created to meet the demand and what Edward had previously mentioned, training districts. We'll also be considering whether or not the equipment and infrastructure will lead to additional or improved climate critical skills, especially training that facilitates reskilling or upskilling current workers. We'll also be looking at whether or not the application demonstrates sustainability of training programs after the initial award. So if the award only goes for 2 years in order for you to install and implement the equipment, we're going to be looking at some metrics that you would be able to project for future cohorts and rounds. We'll also be considering leverage partnerships and resources from relevant stakeholders, in addition to funding from other sources such as local, state, federal, or private funding. And then finally, we're going to be looking as to whether or not the application demonstrates commitment to increase access to EJ and disadvantaged communities that are traditionally underrepresented in these target occupations. Again, more information regarding this additional selection criteria can be found on page 21 of the Climate Critical RFP. Next slide. For outcomes in Strand A, we're going to be looking at whether or not the participants will be able to obtain industry recognized credentials, how strong your placement plans are to put those participants who graduated from your programs into clean energy occupations. What will job retention look like for at least 1 year post-program completion? And how you would be able to track and show increased wages for those incumbent workers that have participated. Additionally, description of plans to engage relevant partners to provide off-ramps to participants. We're going to be looking for employer partners who have comprehensive placement strategies that include dedicated job development staff that will be the lead applicant or partner with provided letters of support or MOUs. Next slide. For strand B, the outcomes that we will be looking for are skills gains, attaining additional certifications and licenses, whether or not the incumbent workers will have promotions or advancement opportunities, the increased wages that come with those promotions and advancement opportunities. And we're going to be looking for an increase in clean energy sector work. Addition to that, description of employers' involvement in the training program as it pertains to recruiting and employee supports. Of course, as always, we're going to be looking for letters of support or memorandums of understanding from at least 2 partners that offer offerings. Next slide. And for strand C, the outcomes is that we're going to be looking for applications that describe the ability to build capacity that will be supported by the new equipment and infrastructure. And then we're also going to be interested in seeing what kind of steps that you would be taking to select, procure, and integrate the new equipment or infrastructure into your program. Additionally, we're going to be looking at the actual impact of the equipment and infrastructure. And we'd like you to describe how the equipment and infrastructure will improve your program, how it will enrich existing training, curriculum, and other clean energy opportunities. And finally, whether or not you can identify programmatic gaps and needs that will be addressed with the new equipment or infrastructure. And now we're going to go to a question and answer period.
Yeah, thanks, Anitra. I do want to just turn everyone's attention to the chat. There were some thoughtful questions and answers there. So if you do have questions, please review that before the end of the presentation. I do want to just leave space for 1 or 2 questions and remind everyone to review our office hour schedule, and Zoom links are on our website. So please join us for those if you have additional questions, especially if they relate to your specific program. But if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll take some time now for 1 or 2. Thanks, Maeve. Okay, last call for questions. Seeing none in the chat and no raised hands, we will move forward with some other opportunities sponsored by Mass CEC. Rodney?
Hi, so yeah, I can take over from here. So yeah, we wanted to bring to your attention extra additional funding opportunities that we have going through with Mass CEC. So here, the first thing that we want to present everyone's attention to is the Clean Energy Industry Program. So for that specifically, it's regarding college students that are over here in Massachusetts that are interested in working in the clean energy industry. So in the event that maybe some of you who have currently open opportunities for internships and potential students you want to work with, there's a really great opportunity for that. Right now, the spring session for spring 2025 is open for enrollment, and that will run for about 12 weeks. It's open from around January 1st to May 16th. So that's the duration of the program. One important thing to know as well regarding the compensation for it is that for the initial program for all 3 sessions for spring, fall, and summer, employers are reimbursed for up to $18 an hour for an hourly wage. And then for spring specifically and for fall, the cap is around $4,230 per intern. Whereas for summer, the cap is $8,640 per intern. So again, for spring session 2025, that is open for enrollment right now. Enrollment for that will go on for until February 5th or before funds run out. And then if you're interested more for the summer internship, which is much larger, has much more funding provided for interns, for employees that are interested, everyone for that will open something around, I would say around like mid-February. So, and then we on to the next slide. We have another internship program as well for employees. So if you currently don't have any current opportunities, or maybe if your work isn't really suited right now for college students, another avenue for funding you could maybe look into is the CCT Work and Learning Program. So this is another separate internship program that we are running that's specifically for vocational high schools, after dark programs, as well as CTI, so career technical initiative students. So all of those students, not participants in those programs are eligible for this program. And so it's not a really good way to sort of have interns gain experience hands-on while working directly with the employer, and for employers to potentially get new work recruits, as well as potentially even get a full-time recruitment as well, depending on how well the internship goes. So the difference for this is that for this technical trades work and learning program, it's 1 year round as opposed to just for 12 weeks for the other program. So this is 1 year round to the academic year, and the cap for this is 8,640 per intern, and funds for this are done on a rolling basis. So if you do find any interns that you're interested in working with, or any students you want to bring onto your work organization, and you're interested in participating as an employer, you can just send us a notification email saying that you're interested, and then from there we can sort of get you sort of work with you to see like what opportunities you could have here in your program. So again, we do have 2 internship programs going on right now. The internship program, which is for college students, that is currently open right now for spring, as well as the technical trades work and learning program, which is more for vocational high schools and after that programs, which is done on a rolling basis and held year round. So it will be going on until around summer of next year. If you have any questions regarding this, you can always just email internships@masscc.com. I'll put that in the chat shortly. But yeah, I'll just give it back to Janelle.
Yeah.
Today.
Thanks, Rodney. And again, if you do have additional internship questions, the email is internships@masscec.com. I believe Rodney is putting that in the chat. That concludes our presentation for the day. Thank you everyone for joining us. And if you do have any questions, you can send them to rfpworkforce@masscec.com, or you can attend one of our many upcoming office hours. And we look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you very much. Please enjoy the weekend, stay warm and safe. Take care.